Hey crew, this is your Captain Caliban speaking, and I've got a question for you. How about that Discovery, huh? Star Trek Discovery, the first new Trek series in over a decade, is finally airing on TV. That is, new TV on CBS All Access. But why am I telling you that? You've already seen it, and you undoubtedly have opinions. Opinions that we want you to share with us on social media at Facebook and Twitter at the username EISTPod. What you may not know is that along with the launch of the Discovery, we have launched a brand new Discovery recap and discussion show called Star Trek Discoverage, which you can hear live every Sunday night after Star Trek Discovery airs. Just follow us on Twitter or on Facebook to get a link to the live show every Sunday night, or you can listen straight from our Spreaker show page where our podcast is hosted. Every week, I and a panel of distinguished guests cover the episode that's just aired, and we talk about what we've seen, what we think we're going to see, and whether or not Lieutenant Saru is the best new character. Spoiler, he is. He totally is. If you can't join us live, don't worry. Retract your threat ganglia. Every episode of the show will be available in the regular Apple Podcast or Google or Stitcher feed or on our YouTube channel for the Just Enough Trope Network. The original plan was to offer old shows as a subscriber benefit to our Patreons, but what the hell? The most contentious issue surrounding Discovery seems to be that people are having to pay for something that they usually get for free, and we don't want to contribute to that heartache. So all of our Star Trek Discoverage episodes will be available for free. Consider it a Star Trek The Next Generation 30th anniversary present. Or is the 30th anniversary Pearl? Anyway, come catch some pearls of wisdom, nailed it, from Star Trek authors, screenwriters, and superfans every Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. Central, right here on Star Trek Discoverage. And if you want to join the conversation yourself, and we're waiting to receive your transmission, you can tweet to us at EISTPod and use the hashtag Discoverage. Our Patreon is still open for business at patreon.com/EISTpod, where you can find all kinds of great content like updates on the show, my DS9 rewatch mini-episodes, my Klingon Christmas Carol rehearsal diary, and more. Join our crew at patreon.com/EISTpod. On the subject of Star Trek Discovery, I talk a little bit about Discovery with today's guest, Jeffrey Lang, and in discussing today's selection, we specifically examine the idea of characters doing something bad, that is, making the right choice for the wrong reasons. And though this episode was recorded early in this year, it turned out to be a little bit prescient, because if you're watching Star Trek Discovery, you know that's exactly what the new show is exploring. So keep listening to hear us wishing for the show that we essentially ended up getting. One more thing, in 2 weeks it'll be our last episode of Enterprising Individuals for this season, featuring some of the most memorable moments from Season 2. Yeah, the shades are going to get a little gray, and we're going to clip show it a little bit. But this toxin can only be defeated by funny and insightful moments from the past. So tune in, it's going to be a good time. And with that, let's get underway.
It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I want to know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I want to know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Caliban, and when it comes to my enjoyment of the 1991 Bruce Willis action comedy film Hudson Hawk, I too will accept the judgment of history. I'm joined on this episode by Jeffrey Lang, author of several Star Trek novels, including the Voyager novel Cohesion, the TNG novel Immortal Coil, and the DS9 two-part novel The Left Hand of Destiny, which he wrote with DS9 series star J.G. Hertzler. He's also had Trek short stories published in anthology form, and he's a Leo. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Hudson Hawk, really? Really?
Is this the Hudson Hawk podcast now? We
sure.
can do that.
Let's just go there.
Okay, we'll take a sidetrack.
Have you seen it? Really?
I have a lot of friends who are movie people, and not just like movie makers, and they have it's probably therapeutic for them, but they have a love of really bad movies, and I'm like, why do you like that? And they're like, well, there's just at some point a movie goes from bad into like wonderfully bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I never understood that, but I think perhaps that's what Hudson Hawk is for me. Like, so many bad decisions were made,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it's so clear that, for whatever's going on, Bruce Willis is having a hell of a time.
He was having a great time.
Yeah.
That was
He got to sing, and
yeah. No, that was a movie that came out at a period in my life when I saw literally everything that came out.
yeah, me too.
And so it was like, big release, fine, we're going to go to the movies, we're going to go see this. And it was just, it went from being this kind of, whoa, what? to, it's this. Oh, okay, fine. Settle in.
Yeah.
Don't, just go with it. It was horrible.
Oh yeah, you're certainly assaulted by the film, but after a while it becomes more like a tickle assault than anything worse.
Yeah,
than
yeah, it's probably something worth going. No, actually, no, it's not worth going back and seeing. What do you want to talk about?
Today we'll be talking about The Wounded, the 12th episode of the 4th season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's an episode that, although the producers probably didn't know it at the time, it ends up introducing many elements to Trek that would form the basis for future episodes and indeed future series in the Star Trek canon.
Mm-hmm.
And the episode, it deals with some markedly dark themes like revenge and racism and discrimination, war crimes, post-traumatic stress, and Irish cuisine. And the way that Star Trek, a perennially optimistic franchise, deals with those themes is something that we'll discuss over the course of the show. But first, let's talk about your backstory. How did you become a Star Trek fan?
I'm old. I'm older than probably. I know most of the guys, the men and women who are right now the kind of core Star Trek authors. Mm-hmm. And I'm in the upper edge of that age range, so I'm one of the few people, maybe me and Greg Cox and Peter David, probably, we're the ones who actually saw Star Trek, the original series, first run. So I was, I've told this story on a couple of occasions. I remember very, very clearly some Friday night, my older brother Mike, who's like 5 years older than I am, putting some show on, and I hid behind. I hear people tell this story about Doctor Who a lot, but Star Trek in the third season especially, because I remember the third season was like they had weird monsters. They were creatures.
Yeah.
And I remember hiding behind the banister of our staircase from as far away from the TV as you could get.
Right.
But not being able to tear myself away because there was this strange stuff going on. It was amazing. It was fascinating. I think I probably was like 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old, something like that.
Sure.
And then it disappeared. It went away.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, when I was in my early teens, it started showing up on what we then called UHF.
Yes.
And I became, it was like every night I think we used to have supper in my house like at 5:30. And I was just one of those kids who would be like, I'm eating supper, because I had to get to the TV by 6 o'clock when it would come on, and watched the whole thing all the way through, and then realized, it ends, but it doesn't really end, but it kind of ends, but then it starts over again, and then it was one of those shows that you could watch the second or the third or the fourth time through, and you would pick up new bits of business and character development, and it just felt like it was something that was created by a specific person or people, and they had a really clear idea of what it was they wanted to do, which was unlike anything else that was on at the time. I mean, they were good, not to say there weren't good shows on in the 60s and early 70s. There were, but this was clearly something that was and now we know it. Of course, it is true. It was a person's vision.
Yeah.
So it was really gripping, and it just spoke to me. So that's the origin. Yeah.
I think that Yeah, and you say that they knew what they wanted. I think that's kind of true. I'm not sure they always knew what they wanted, but I think they knew what they didn't want.
Yes, I think that.
Yeah.
I like that. I really like that. I think you're absolutely
you.
right. I think they knew what they didn't want. They didn't want Irwin Allen, vegetable man. Let me be careful. To be clear here, I loved Irwin Allen. I loved those shows, but this is a whole different other kind of thing, and there was something about it that spoke to me. I think, like a lot of people, that I felt like those characters. I'm quoting Philip J. Fry here. They became my friends.
I've heard that story too about kids hiding behind the couch watching Doctor Who or whatever, and I agree. I didn't see these episodes in the original run, but I saw them pretty soon after in syndication, and the neural parasites from Operation Annihilate always scare me.
Oh my God, yes.
And they're just little flappy, like placental pancakes, But for some reason, that was just really, really spooky and weird to me.
Yeah, no, and they took over your brain, and you didn't get better.
Right.
And they were terrifying. The Gorn was terrifying.
Yeah.
There were a handful of other monsters that they did that were pretty scary, but they were just as good at doing like concepts that were frightening. People taking over your brain. I remember the one that really scared me. Like, just terrified me. I'm not going to remember the title. But the one where they could remove all the water from your body and you just became this geometric solid.
Right.
You could hold in your hand, and that guy crushed it. Okay, that person is dead.
I think it was the female crew member too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, they're gonna kill.
They're gonna kill
a woman.
Yeah. That scared the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
Now, and the Wounded, and getting back to the Wounded is one of those ones that was, the original series kind of went back and forth between light and dark adventure, kind of some preachy storylines that were a little bit on the dark side. And then Next Generation came along, which was overall, at least for the first 3 seasons, a pretty optimistic show. I feel like The Wounded is kind of the tipping point. I would have to go back and look at the whole schedule of season 4 and kind of say, where did things start going? But see, this one really feels to me like one of the first ones where they said this universe is a little bit darker than we have intimated up until now. They explained there was a war. There was a huge war.
Right.
And up until this point in time, the only time you have any sense of there being any kind of conflict was, well, there were some things with Klingons, and we did a little bit of, back and forth over the neutral zone with the Romulans, and of course the Borg. Don't take that away. But that was a completely outside force. This is the first time they introduced the concept of there was this war with this very muddled ideology. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because of what? I mean, this is the Arab-Israeli war. This is the we're mucking around in things that we don't completely understand what the repercussions of everything are, but we're in it and we're committed. I think this is like the point where the Star Trek universe that followed up into Deep Space Nine, of course, where things get really gray, shades of gray everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, don't say shades of gray on TNG.
Oh, sorry.
Can you talk about working with J.G. Hertzler?
Other than that, he's a lovely man, who has the best voice ever. Yeah. He and I, the working on the Klingon, on the Left Hand of Destiny was a really fun but very stressful project. This is now 15 years ago for me, when I was a younger and healthier man. It was a project that our editor, Marco Palmieri, I'm sure that's a name you've heard on more than one occasion,
of course,
brought to me. He said, I've been working with JG on this John, his first name is John.
Right.
We've been working on this, and he did a lot of work. He did a tremendous amount of work on it, and then he was basically, unable to devote any more attention to it. And what it really needed was shaping. So we talked about it a couple of times, and he wrote this thing almost like it was a screenplay. He's a playwright. Did you know that?
Yeah.
He's a playwright, and he wrote the thing almost like it was a play. And I can imagine as a play, it would have been tremendous, but a play is not a novel. So what I had to do was take this thing that he had written and turn it from being in this one format into another format. And he was nothing but supportive. I really kind of took this thing and said, okay, I'm going over here now, and I'm going to basically rewrite it, and I'm going to keep certain things that you've done. I'm going to discard certain things that you've done, and I'm going to try and layer in the connective tissue. That's the word I was trying to think of. The connective tissue that changes this from being a play into a novel. It was very Shakespearean in tone.
Sure.
Because that's John. And I realized I felt like it needed to have a little bit more humanity. And I say that because he was writing it from the perspective of being a Klingon.
Right.
And I felt like, no, you can't write. I mean, it's too big. It's too operatic. That's the word. He was operatic.
Klingon operatic, yes.
Huge. Everything was at 11. And I felt like what I needed to do was kind of bring it down to somewhere modulated. Yes, let's have our 11 moments, but let's also have our lower, quieter moments. And what I think I did more than anything, and I hope he wouldn't disagree with me, is I changed he had introduced the Ferengi character. There's a Ferengi character who becomes his name's Far. And when we talked about it, I said, okay, what you have here is you have the story of Don Quixote, but you don't have a Sancho Panza. You need that. And he was like, oh God, yes. That's what I introduced. I brought this character into the story who serves as his, what's the knight have? What does the knight have?
A squire.
Yes, he needed a squire. He needed somebody who would talk to him and bring Martok down to a level we, the readers, could appreciate and understand. And that's what I feel like that was my big contribution to it.
Great.
And yeah, it was fun. He was a great guy. We did a reading together one time at a conference, at a convention, at one of the shore leave conventions, and that was one of one of the high points of my life.
Before we get started, I have to ask whether you're keeping up on Ira Steven Bear's DS9 documentary, if you're looking forward to that.
I recently found out about it. I'm very excited to find out what those guys had planned for season 8. That's tremendous.
Yeah.
Having been on the, kind of editorial team, not the editorial team, the author team, when we were kind of scoping out season 8,
right.
I did Abyss, and then the Left Hand of Destiny. That was kind of our this is what season 8 would be like if we did it. And so I want to hear what they say.
Right, yeah.
I would also love to hear if they had any idea what we were doing, because probably they would just go, no, that wouldn't be that.
No, that's not it.
That's not it.
But we're talking about Next Generation
on
this show.
Sorry, yes.
It's The Wounded, as we said. It's the 12th episode of the 4th season. First aired January 28th, 1991. The teleplay here is by Jerry Taylor, supervising producer and later executive producer on TNG. Of course, the co-creator of Star Trek Voyager. And she has many writing credits across the franchise. This is one of 17 scripts that she wrote or contributed to on Next Generation. The story is by Stuart Charno, Sarah Charno, and Cy Shermack. This is Shermack's only series credit. But Stewart and Sarah wrote the TNG episodes New Ground and Ethics. And Stewart is also an actor who has appeared on many TV shows. And fun fact, played the killer in my favorite episode of The X-Files, Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose.
Really? That's amazing. Oh, that makes me. Thank you for. Okay, my day has been made.
If you look him up, yeah, he's one of those guys. He's one of those. I know that guy. One of those guys. And he's definitely been in a lot of stuff. He's very distinctive looking. And when I thought, that name sounds familiar, I looked it up. And sure enough, yeah, he's the bellboy or whoever it was in that episode.
As long as we're talking about, I know that guy. Sure. Bob Gunton, the guy who plays Ben Maxwell. He's one of those guys. He has been in everything.
Yeah, probably most famously in Shawshank Redemption. But also he was recently in the Daredevil show as Leland Owsley as well. So yeah, he pops up everywhere.
Yeah, and a fine actor. He's
great.
Good in everything he does. Yeah.
This episode was directed by Chip Chalmers, who directed 4 episodes of TNG and 2 of DS9, and he was also a first AD on 12 episodes of TNG. The star date for this episode is 44429.6. And your assignment, Jeff, if you can, is to give me a 25-word synopsis of The Wounded.
Enterprise is called in to investigate what appears to be an unprovoked attack by another starship, encounters Cardassians for the first time, discovers that the captain of the Phoenix may be at fault. I'm way over 25 words here. And the captain was the former commander of Miles O'Brien. And this is really the key thing. Sorry, I know I'm way over 25 words. The key thing is this is the first time you really begin. This is the first time you find out anything about O'Brien as a character.
That's right.
And that is why it's one of my favorite episodes.
Whenever people are trying to hit a 25-word target, they suddenly pronouns disappear.
Yeah.
And
right.
Have
you ever see? Okay, this made me laugh because I saw a digression. And Will Arnett, he was on this BBC program over the week, and they do this thing this challenge where they have a person do a phone call, like a prank phone call. They have to speak to somebody on the phone, and every sentence has to begin with a different, A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Sure.
He does it. It's brilliant. He's an improv guy, and he's just you can just see his wheels going, okay, I can't say this. Okay. Oh, all right. And he does this. So, yes, 25 words or less. I could never do it if I had to in a million.
I think I've seen something like that on Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yes.
I think the British one.
Yes.
Well, some interesting facts from the memory banks for this episode. This episode uses the song The Minstrel Boy, which was actually in the film The Man Who Would Be King. The use of it was suggested by Michael Piller. It was originally written to commemorate those who died in the Irish Rebellion of 1798. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize this, but that same motif comes back again in the final episode of DS9 in one of O'Brien's final scenes. Yeah. There were several scenes that were filmed but cut from the final edit of this episode. There's nothing really illuminating in them. I think they were justifiably cut. But they were discovered by a Canadian collector who had a copy of an early work print of the episode, and he was able to get them to CBS for inclusion in the Season 4 Blu-ray bonus features.
Oh.
And it's just, they just cut them for runtime. It's a little more like Riker talks to a guy and, that sort of thing. This episode, of course, features the introduction of the Cardassians, who would go on to be major antagonists on DS9. Mark Alimo plays Gul Macet in the episode. He would go on to play series villain Gul Dukat on Deep Space Nine.
With facial hair.
Yeah, right, I know, which is so strange. And the Cardassians' neck ridges and I guess general look are reportedly based on his distinctive neck muscles and physiognomy, which earned him the nickname The Neck on the set. And yes, of course, the facial hair that he supports is absent from future depictions of the Cardassians. As is
ever.
Yeah, as is their headgear, which looks kind of like a retainer, like a nighttime retainer.
Yeah.
I guess Cardassian
the helmet is horrible.
Yeah, the helmet's not good. Cardassian orthodontistry has improved due to cultural exchange, I guess, in the future. Alimo also played the first Romulan, or one of the first Romulans we see on TNG, Tabak, in the episode The Neutral Zone. He's the guy that goes, "We are back."
Oh, right. Oh, I'd forgotten that.
And the designer of the Cardassians, Michael Westmore, based their look on an abstract painting he saw of a woman with a spoon on her head. So, mystery solved. There you go.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to see this painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, man.
And this episode is the first appearance of the Nebula-class ship as well as the Gaylor-class Cardassian ship. Do you have a favorite Starfleet ship design?
Yes, I do. And it is this. I can't remember the name of the design, but it is the design of the Phoenix and also the Reliant.
The Miranda.
Is that
Miranda
what it
class.
is?
Yeah. Reliant, like Star Trek 2, right?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on Memory Alpha right now, and it says here the Phoenix was a Nebula class.
Oh, okay.
Now that doesn't mean that the Reliant wasn't a. What did you say, Miranda?
Miranda. Yeah, I think they're similar in concept, but one uses the old saucer section, and the Nebula is sort of the shortened one that uses the new the Enterprise D one.
Right. Well, then if I were going to have to choose between those, I would have to say the Reliant. I always found that sort of smaller, compact. What would you call it? It's like a destroyer, as opposed to a. The Enterprise, which is a cruiser or an aircraft.
Like a frigate. Yeah.
Yes, right. I always found that little compact. Now, of course, I also have a very, very deep affection for the Defiant, but there was only one of those. Was there ever another ship that had that configuration? I don't remember.
Again, we're digging down into later episodes. The Defiant, of course, was a prototype. I think they did eventually, maybe not on screen, but in canon, have a production sort of model of it. But yeah, it was pretty unique for what it was.
But it was great in those those latter episodes of Deep Space Nine where they have this huge battle sequences where you would have all these saucer-shaped things flying through Constitution class, and you'd have just this one weirdo little matchbox-looking ship
right.
that would just weave in and out of things. That was that was so wonderful.
Yeah, it was neat. It was a different way to sort of look at the starship battles on the show.
Yeah.
So, The Wounded.
Yeah.
Star Trek is, I think by its nature and intention, it's a very positive show, but I'm always fascinated by the episodes in which it tries to explore deeper and darker issues. And I mean, in ways that are a little more sophisticated than, these guys have black on one side of their face and white on the other, and then vice versa. And I think those episodes, the darker ones, often resonate more strongly with the fan base. Mm-hmm. And DS9 had a bunch of these. Episodes dealing with Kira's past as a partisan fighter against the Cardassians. Trek, as a rule, doesn't deal much with sexual assault, but episodes like TNG's Man of the People is a good analog for that. Genocide is dealt with in Voyager's Memorial and the episode Remember as well. And I think this episode is sort of a riff on Heart of Darkness. That's from Taylor herself. And do you think that Trek as a property, in which a society of enlightened beings has solved most of their problems, can it really effectively explore complex social issues?
If you accept the concept that it is a story about enlightened beings, actually, I think the strength of the latter Trek, and I'm talking particularly about the back half of TNG and DS, and then all of DS9.
Yeah.
It's the story of the conflict between people who consider themselves to be enlightened beings. Right. And those who maybe aren't quite so enlightened or think that the idea of others considering themselves enlightened beings is ridiculous, or they have that there's great hubris in their believing that they are enlightened.
Right.
And I think in particular the idea that again, we're talking about DS9, but I think this is also in TNG.
It applies, yeah.
You have the prophets kind of at the top of that scale, and then you have the changelings, and I don't remember what they called themselves. Apologies for that. And then the Federation, and then the Romulans, and the Klingons, and all these different, and the Cardassians, all these different layers, and they all consider themselves to be enlightened, and they think the others are, others. They are not enlightened. And it's the conflict between those different groups. TNG, they didn't play with this quite as much, though arguably, I think, even in the the most important conflicts in TNG between the Federation and the Q and the Federation and the Borg, what are those conflicts? They're points of view.
They're ideological. Yeah.
They are ideological. They believe, I have the correct interpretation of reality, and you are a poor benighted souls, and we must explain this to you.
Sure. That's such an interesting way to look at it, too. They always say that, the best movie villain or TV villain never thinks that he's wrong. He thinks that he's right. And so we're humans watching this show, so that's our point of view, and so we have to follow, in large part, our human characters. But if our Cardassian was watching the show, then maybe the show would be very different, and we'd be following something completely different.
Yeah. And I think the novels, I'm a novel guy, but I think the novels, especially Una McCormick's novels, have done a great job of expressing that point of view about the Cardassians. They consider themselves to be treated unfairly, and they have had to deal with all kinds of challenges, and their responses to those challenges have been to do things that they felt were appropriate and right, including things that, from our perspective, are slavery. I mean, repression.
Right.
But from their perspective, are like, no. These people, we're taking care of them. They had some bad ideas. We're going to educate them, blah, blah, blah. I mean, all the kinds of things that oppressors say to themselves at some point or another. No, your point taken. No oppressor has ever said, "Oh, we're evil. We're just gonna."
Are we the baddies? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No. We're good. We're gonna take care of these folks.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Roddenberry always maintained that humans don't fight each other in the future. They don't have conflict. In this episode, it comes near the end of his tenure on the show and his life in general. You'd have to think that he would have had a problem with it if he was more involved with the production at that point.
I'm sure he would have, and he would have also flattened it out and made it less nuanced. And I think that is the great virtue of this episode. Maxwell isn't wrong, but he's not right either.
Do you think that this is maybe an easy question to answer, but do you think that he's justified? I mean, we learn at the end of the episode that no matter what his methods, he was probably right about what was going on.
I think in this instance, this is one of those times where they used Picard really well. Picard could be a self-righteous prick sometimes.
Yeah, especially early on in the show.
Yeah. But they began to wield him much more effectively. I mean, obviously, the writers were figuring things out, and they were getting a sense of what their actors and, everybody could do.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that they do really well with him here is say, Maxwell, you're not wrong, but the way you did it, you've lost us. We cannot defend you.
Right.
And there were so many other ways you could have done this.
Yeah.
That's really the point of the story. There were so many other ways he could have done this where he would have been the hero, but because of the damage, the wound, let's just pound that nail right on the head that Maxwell has, when the opportunity came for him to, express his the PTSD. I think you said that earlier. You said I think that's definitely what this story is about. Yeah. A person of upstanding character and good moral, I wrote a whole goddamn book about this guy. I love him, but he did the wrong thing.
And I agree that, I think that in the episode, it's a little bit underwritten. Like you spoke before about hitting a nail on the head. I don't think they really have to beat it into you what he's going through. And they do, talk about the loss of his family and the PTSD. But if there was something a little more just for the character, because he comes off as so petty at times. Like he insults and taunts Picard. I mean, his best insult is that Picard is a foolish fool. And I would have liked him to be.
And his office smells of like a bureaucrat.
Yeah, bureaucracy. What's that whiff of bureaucracy? Yeah. But if he was just like a really charismatic leader and had a really good case, and Picard still has to take him in just because of these principles, like you said, like this is the wrong way, right or wrong, you're doing this the wrong way. I think I would have been a little more convinced.
Yeah,
even though Ganton is working his ass off, to make it work.
Yeah, no, it's not a 5-star episode. It is not, because they don't give Maxwell quite the nuance that I think he really might have. I think that they wanted to, but they do give him these interactions with O'Brien,
right?
Which give him a humanity, but also a nostalgia. They have this shared moment of, am I remembering correctly that when the two of them are sitting and talking, they get kind of hammered?
When he first steps off the transporter platform, he's like, oh my God, it's Miles O'Brien. He gives him the little crack about the Blarney Stone and all that. And then later on, when O'Brien beams aboard the Phoenix, they do kind of, and this is before Saving Private Ryan, but they do kind of remember that guy? What was his name? Stinky or whatever?
Stinky, yeah.
And he, of course, he's dead. And so they kind of bond over that.
But do they drink?
I don't think so. There's a part where he drinks. He's in 10 forward, and a Cardassian comes in, and they kind of share a drink
That's
together.
what I'm thinking of. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was just remembering that these two guys kind of cast aside a bit of the rank thing. He's a captain. Oh, I'm just a chief.
Right.
And they have this intimacy that I felt like really humanized Maxwell. Now, again, we're talking about Bob Gunton, who's this guy who's this real warmth and charm to him that cuts through a lot of the not so great writing. If you felt like in his interactions with Picard, he comes across as a bit of a strident, I agree. And I think they could have done a lot better, because clearly his crew believes in him.
Except we don't really see where is his crew in this episode. Like, you never really see anybody else.
This is only season 4. They didn't have that much money.
That's true. Yeah. O'Brien beams aboard and he just walks into the captain's ready room, and at no point nobody went, "Who is this guy?"
Well, that was one of the things I tried to address in the novel, is that his crew absolutely, faithfully had this, faith in him.
Right.
That they just, he was very charismatic, not because he was like Picard. I mean, Picard has a warmth to him, but really, why do you follow Picard? Because Picard just is like this exemplar. He's everything you want your captain to be.
Yeah.
Maxwell is much more he's just a guy. He's a good guy. He's just a solid guy. And again, maybe I'm projecting a bit too much of my own impression.
No, I think that's there. I think that's all implied. It's you'd follow him into hell, that kind of guy.
Yeah. He's just, because he's going to go. He's going to go first.
Right.
Yeah. He's. I mean, of the captains that they portrayed on TNG from the Federation, this is something I was thinking about recently.
Okay.
How many of them did you like?
Ooh, boy. Ronnie Cox as Jellicoe was a real hard ass, too.
Yep.
Fraser Crane was all right, I guess.
For that 2 seconds that he was there.
For 2 seconds.
Yeah. It was all right.
Rachel Garrett from yesterday's Enterprise was definitely... She made me want to see the Enterprise C show.
Well, that's true. Oh, I'm sorry. Rachel Garrett. Yeah. Yes.
But otherwise, they're often put in sort of stark relief against Picard. Yeah.
Or Riker when is the captain. So, Maxwell is one of the handful that you kind of went, okay, yeah, I can see why this guy is a captain and why people would follow him, and which is what he is, which is why it's a tragedy, because he is a tragic character. He is and think about that. How many episodes of how many hundreds of episodes of Star Trek there are, how many tragic characters are there? Not that many. So this is a fine piece of writing that these people did, and it was it's why it's one of my favorites.
It's also Chief O'Brien's first real episode, that focuses on him.
Mm-hmm.
DS9 would go on to explore his past with the Cardassians, but I agree that it's a fine piece of writing. Here's another piece of criticism. I think that the episode lets him off kind of easy. You have Maxwell, as we've said, he's consumed by vengeance. But at least in this episode, it's enough for O'Brien to have a drink in 10-4 with one of the Cardassians, and he's a little sad, but he's pretty much on board at the end to talk Maxwell out of what's going on. And it feels like the little moments, like where Kiko asks him about it, or we see Troy having a clear empathic reaction to the emotions that she senses he's feeling. It seems like we'd get something a little more, or a little stronger in the script before the end of the episode, and, more than him just icing those guys on the turbo lift.
Agreed. I totally agree.
We don't want to see him go as far as Maxwell does, but at least to sort of feel that same thing and then turn around and make the right choice because he's our hero.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say to that is it was 1991.
Okay.
And you didn't necessarily have that kind of courage in writing secondary characters. I think if you, again, this is all speculation, but if you wrote this story in an episode of a Netflix series or hopefully maybe we'll see something like this in Discovery in the not too distant future.
Sure.
If you saw something like this now, yes, they would give a secondary. Well, I think at this point saying O'Brien is a secondary character is a compliment. Tertiary character, to give them that kind of moment, that kind of outburst. Speaking as somebody who saw all this stuff first run, it would have been inappropriate. It would have felt like a turn, like, oh, the actor is, doing something. It would have. TNG was a fairly restrained show. Mm-hmm. The actors were not doing big things most of the time. So I don't know, maybe I'm being a little defensive here. I don't know if they could have I don't know if they could have let O'Brien have that kind of a moment, but I agree with you. It would have been a better story if he had.
I think you make a good argument. If this was Battlestar Galactica, like the new one,
yes,
he would have pushed the button that blew them up, and then you have to live with it for the next 3 seasons.
Yes. It's funny. Let's raise a glass to Richard Hatch.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah,
he passed away recently. Yes,
I just found out about that recently, and it got me thinking about when it was good. That show was really good. It did stuff. No, nothing has done. That's the show. That's the show I want Discovery to be.
Which, being helmed and created, or at least rebooted by a guy that was kind of fed up with Trek. I think it's sort of an answer to Trek in a lot of ways. So it'll be interesting to see if Trek answers back or just appropriates what they did, sort of taking it to a sort of different place.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's tough to hang an episode on O'Brien, at least early on. Cole Meany, he's an expressive actor, even though he plays a pretty unflappable and reserved character. And I feel like it's tough to peel back the layers of O'Brien, at least initially. When I initially heard that they were way, way back in the day when they were moving him to DS9, I thought, oh, great, well, DS9 will have a transporter chief. And of course, they took that character and did much, much more than they had ever done with a tertiary character, as you said on the show. Also, he was tactical officer for Maxwell, and now he's transporter chief. Did he do something wrong? Did he get busted down or something? Seems like a step down.
This is my impression. He was a tactical chief on a relatively small ship. The Rutledge was, by the standards of what we think of as starships, just a little. It was a scout ship. So my impression has always been that the story with O'Brien was that he, because of the things that he went through on what was it? Oh God, what was the name of the planet? Setlec or the Battle of blah blah blah. They talk about it.
Setlec 3.
Setlec 3. Thank you. Very good. That he basically reappraised what he wanted to do, and the fact that he was able to save the lives of some of his colleagues because he was able to fix a transporter kind of made him go, there's another career path.
I don't want to be the guy that's incinerating people. Maybe I can be the guy who's beaming people.
I can save people, or and then on TNG he was introduced as this guy who ran the transporter and blah 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 blah. And then I think it was one of those things where the producers and the writers went, "Wait a minute, this guy's actually a really good actor," and they elevated him from there. So trying to negotiate, the what was going on behind the scenes. And then, bringing that into alignment with the path of the character.
Right.
It doesn't always work.
Right.
Did you ever, as a side note, there was a few years ago, I can't remember who did it. There was a series of cartoons, comic strips about Chief O'Brien as this, really sad character who all he ever did was stand in the transporter room and transport. And he had this weird, interesting inner life. But it was just these static panel-to-panel things of O'Brien standing behind the transporter panel. And interesting things going on all around him. And he would just be like, okay, transporting you now.
Yeah.
Does this ring a bell?
It's called Chief O'Brien at Work. It's by an artist named John Adams. Yeah.
Yes, that. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Like Wesley and the Traveler show up and they've just been to another galaxy and they're taking off again and he's just like, okay, great.
Yes. I loved that. That was so funny.
Yeah, I learned from that too that I never really thought of it this way, but Cole Meany has a very caricaturable face, or at least a face that you could represent in art and instantly you go, oh, that's the guy, that's him.
You don't need to be a great artist to capture Cole Meany's face. No.
Right.
Doodle, hair. Yes, got it.
I think this is the first look into Miles and Keiko's married lives since they got married in Data's Day. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion of Keiko?
There was some program that I was watching, and the actress who played Keiko was in a scene, and she was a lawyer. I can't even imagine what it was. And I thought, oh, it's her. Oh, she's actually animated in this. She's a pretty good actress. Huh. Yeah. Who'd have thunk?
Huh. Yeah. I'm putting everybody on trial, this show, it looks like. What do you think about the show's reported, lack of strong female characters? I guess that's a cliched term, but its problem sort of writing for female characters.
Oh, man.
I mean, this is Jerry Taylor is putting this together here.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good question. Now, I never really thought about in the sense of male versus female characters. I mean, honestly, on TNG, there's really only two good characters. There's Picard and there's Data. Mm-hmm. So are we going to slam them for doing bad female characters? Because Riker has no discernible personality besides the fact that he plays the trombone.
And he doesn't like his dad.
And he doesn't like his dad.
Yeah. But at least he gets storylines.
Yeah.
He goes out and does stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas Keiko has to deal with Miles's socks, and she starts a school later on DS9.
And the interesting, and the thing is that she's introduced as being this kind of interesting character. She's a botanist. She's actually got a career,
right? And
that gets sort of subsumed for a while. Though I think, in their defense, when they got her over to DS9, they did get to the point where they were like, "We can't keep making this woman, have babies and." Socks. I mean, she had their marriage goes through a stressful period.
Yeah,
I mean, so they don't completely ignore the complexities, but I agree they did not serve her well. I'm trying to think though, were there any female characters on TNG that they did a good job with? Certainly not Troy. I mean, she had her moments.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that when they specifically turned their attention to her, the scripts for her shows were so bad. Like any Troy show, it's probably not going to be a very good script.
Yeah, but neither were the Dr. Crusher episodes.
Oh, no, definitely not.
And I really, and this is the thing, I always really liked that the character. I mean, Gates McFadden was a really engaging actor, and I think she always really. And I'm not saying anything about Troy. I'm sorry, I can't.
Marina Sirtis.
Thank you. I think she also. I mean, she did a fine job with what they gave her, but they just didn't give them very much. I think Keiko was a great idea for a character. I think the idea of marrying or bringing together this Celtic character and a Asian woman was really interesting, and the conflicts that they had were fine, but they were kind of surface level. Oh, I'm going to make you a lamb stew like my mother made. Oh, I'm going to give you kelp. Oh, but that's what fish eat. I mean, come on. You're living in the 23rd, 24th, 23rd, whatever.
Yeah.
You've eaten weirder things than kelp.
Yeah. And again, just looking at, just in terms of structure, from a writer's perspective, you get two little bits with them. You think that you would come back at least one more time. They just sort of fly off at the end with Maxwell in chains. You think O'Brien would come back home and maybe they're having another dinner, and then he's like, I never told you about what happened on Kedlik 3 or whatever.
Exactly. There were many opportunities there for a little more rounding off of what their marriage was like, especially since they spent so much time on it in the very beginning. I mean, that early scene, that's like 4 or 5 minutes. That's a significant portion of the story.
Right.
You know, whatever, 45, 48 minutes, something like that. You know, other than it showing O'Brien as being kind of a dick. What is it? What are they doing there?
Yes, he likes Irish food. Right. Well, okay, all right, let's talk about something fun and give the episode a break a little bit. Of course, the Cardassians first appear in this episode. And what I love, just right off the bat about them, is that they are not, even in this early appearance, one-note aliens. They don't come on and they have one particular sort of habit or thing that characterizes them.
Or logic.
Yes, right. Or they love money. Or right. They have a lot of depth. But there's something just a little... I mean, they're a lot like humans in a way, but there's something a little off. It's like that neighbor on your street you never really talk to. He comes and goes at weird hours. And he just seems a bit off. You know, not bad necessarily, but it's like, what's that guy's deal?
Yeah, that's well observed. I agree with you. They hit on something right there in that first episode that made them alien, but not in a way that you felt like there was a one-note, mono-dimensional, if that's a word. If it isn't,
it is now.
It is now. Like, we're only going to define an entire species. Is that right? Yeah, species. They are a species, sure.
Right, sure.
By a single attribute.
Yeah.
That scene in the bar with those guys where, you know, O'Brien's just like, we're grunts. You know, we're all grunts here. We're having a drink. You know, I don't like you. I mean, I know you're not necessarily bad people, but I don't like you.
Right.
Is actually, you know, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the whole thing about Roddenberry and his involvement, and there was no way he would have let something like that go through, because he would never allow a human say to an alien, "I don't like you."
That's true. Although I can think of another drinking scene in the Trouble of Tribbles where Scotty, he is pushed, but he is eventually pushed to take a swing at a Klingon. Good point. And this kind of diffuses that, because you think maybe O'Brien's going to put the glass through the guy's face, but instead he's just kind of like, yeah, I don't like what I've become because of you, and I don't like what I've become. Yeah, you know, that's even more to the point. I don't like what I've become because of you. Yeah. Well, it's all about engineers. Engineers are the ones who do things that other people won't do. They'll say the things that other people won't say. Scott, somebody, O'Brien will kind of go, It's always the engineers. So take that as a plot device that we now all have to avoid forever and ever. Yeah, that's a good point. You mentioned the facial hair on Gulmaset before. He's got these little mutton chops.
It's spectacular.
And they don't connect to anything.
Nothing. No.
Neither physically or even conceptually. And it's something that never comes back. And my little headcanon for that is that maybe post-war Cardassia had a hipster phase like we're experiencing now. We don't know how old Masset is, but Cardassians live a little longer than humans, so maybe in addition to being a captain, he's got a little artisan pet food business or something.
Sure.
Everybody's got to have a side hustle these days.
He makes artisanal bespoke like bourbon in his bathroom.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Something like that. No, my headcanon for that has always been Michael Westmore had like bought a few too many facial hair applications, and he was like, oh God, if I don't use these, they're going to take them out of my budget next season. I got to figure out some. Oh, wait a minute. Wait, come here. You, come here. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah, great. You look great. Yeah, that's it.
But on the main guy, though, I mean, maybe on the left-hand guy, not on the actual.
Well, no. Okay. So that brings it. I think that brings your hipster thing, actually brings it into sharp focus, because you don't want to have the left hand or the right hand guy having the hipster facial hair. You want to have the main guy. So I think we're back around to your interpretation, and I'm now it's my headcanon. I'm going to subscribe to that. It's what happened.
Okay. Yeah, he carves model sunships out of driftwood or something like that.
I like that. Yeah.
Sells them in the market. Yeah. Well, did you have a? I mean, we've talked extensively about the show. It's not really like a funny show, but was there a favorite joke or comedy bit that you had from the episode?
I mean, I remember this as being one of the ones where they just sort of said, this is a serious story. We are not going to screw around with it. I mean, the thing I mentioned earlier about Maxwell saying that Picard's ready room smelled musty, like a bureaucrat's office.
Right.
I felt like, yeah, okay, that's fair. I mean, I think the thing about Picard is that from the outside, he does look like a bureaucrat. He isn't, but he kind of looks like one. You could be deceived into believing that he is a bureaucrat.
And certainly the first captain coming after Kirk, who Kirk's chief enemy was bureaucrats. Like, he hated bureaucracy. So to have somebody who's willing to be what he would call diplomatic, but someone else might call bureaucratic, is a contrast there.
Yeah.
This isn't really like a comedy joke, but I do like how, once again, like, Worf was right. He's always right. He tells him at the beginning of the episode, I don't trust these guys. We should raise the shields. We should have them follow him around. And they're like, don't worry about it. Then, of course, the Cardassians shoot at them. Later on, they're trying to hack into the Enterprise's Wi-Fi. Like, nobody ever listens to Worf. Poor Worf.
Yeah. Well, he is the alarmist.
Certainly he is.
Yeah. Yes. As you say, most of the time justifiably. But think about all of those other times that they didn't do stories about living with Worf. Like, oh, that shellfish, that's very suspicious looking. I wouldn't eat that shellfish. If you ate that shellfish, I am pretty sure that you're going to get sick. Don't eat that shellfish. I mean, can you imagine living with that guy 24/7? You're only seeing like 1 out of 20 days of life with Worf. And most of the time, something is happening. And of course, yes, he's right, because he's warning you. But he's warning you about, now, there's a wet spot on the floor there. Be careful when you're standing there, Captain. Now, Captain, step around the wet spot. No, if you step on the wet, you're going to slip. But you don't see the episodes.
No.
He's wrong.
Yeah.
And the eye rolling. That God.
Yeah.
Oh, just shut up.
Michael Dorn has really perfected that facial expression when he says, we have to do this. And then Picard's like, okay, all right, you're fine. Mm-hmm. And then he has to do it anyway. And he's got that sort of, fine, I'll do it.
Yeah. No, he suffers.
I think we've been pretty thorough. I think we've covered just about anything. But if there's any parting shots or any last thoughts you have about the episode, now's the time.
I think that this is one of the few episodes where anybody sings. And that is noteworthy. Mm-hmm. Can you think of any others?
There's an episode where Riker goes to a bar and the four-armed lady sings some Klingon opera for him, but none of the main characters, certainly. And they play a flute.
Yeah, no. The only other one I can think of is Brent Spiner getting his song on in, was it Nemesis or?
Yes, Blue Skies.
Blue Skies. And he has a very lovely voice, and I think that was fine. It was a terrible movie, but I got to hear him saying, I think that anytime you can bring a reasonable, a story-worthy reason into an episode where people sing and it makes sense is a lovely, lovely thing. Yeah, and there aren't too many others. I can't think of too many TV shows, period, where this has been done. It's a minor note, but it is something I think is worth mentioning and is kind of remarkable in and of itself. They do a good job. Also, the whole Irish thing, the Maxwell O'Brien, we're Irish guys, in this universe where we have been led to believe that nationalities and like kind of cultural background are not as important. Scotty notwithstanding.
Right.
The fact that they bring that in and they say, no, it is still important. People do take pride in these things. They identify with these things. I think that's also quite lovely. So this is still, it's not, I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's a 5-star episode, but I think it's a really strong 4-star episode that does some things that I don't even know if they even did in later seasons where I know they tried to tackle meaningful stories.
Tough stuff. Yeah, right.
Yeah. This is right up there. And I think, notably, you already said this, and I think it's still important, worth mentioning. It's the introduction of the Cardassians, which gave them, not just in TNG, but also in DS9, some of the richest story fodder they ever had.
Yeah.
They do great, great stuff.
Yeah, the world building in this is great because, like you said, they'll come back and mine this for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of shows that are coming up, are you looking forward to Discovery?
I am contractually obligated to say so because my good friend Kirsten Bear is one of the co-producers. So,
right, of course.
If I said anything else, she would come and find me and hit me. So, yes.
Duly noted. I am as well. Let's talk My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
Still Kirk. I mean, I get a little, embarrassed about that sometimes because I think he's kind of a reactionary, jingoistic, dickhead sometimes, but he has courage. He has a strong sense of who he is, and he believes in the mission that they are doing. The other thing I think I really appreciate about him is that he has tremendous respect for what he has tremendous respect for the mission of the Federation, even if though there are times where he thinks they are assholes. And I don't think that there's like a big conflict with the other captains or anything like that. I just find him to be the one who resonates the most with my kind of idea of what you want somebody who's in that kind of position of authority to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to improve on an original too.
Yeah. Who's yours?
Kirk.
Oh, okay.
I've talked about, I won't bore the listeners. I've talked about it on the show before, but I will say that in light of this episode that we discussed, we do want our characters to be flawed and interesting and not perfect. Mm-hmm. And it's ironic that even though Roddenberry intended the original crew of the Enterprise to be sort of the perfect people, with the distance of history, and you mentioned jingoism and all those things, the farther away we get, the more those characters become kind of flawed and outdated. Mm-hmm. And you can look at it as a period piece, or you can enjoy the sort of ideas that they have to sort of get over and get around their manifest destiny kind of thing. Yeah. And what still works about the show, unlike other shows that are quote unquote dated, is that I think the characters still come out okay, make the right choice, even with the sometimes backward sexual politics. They run into these races that are, from humanity's terms, are way worse off than us, and they still kind of do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Like I still continue to enjoy it for those reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
A mean drop kick on that guy too.
Yes, right. Well, come on. And the Kirk double-handed karate chop, come on.
Right, give him the axe handle. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, dude, what alien species could stay? Oh, wait, the Gorn. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the Gorn.
Yeah.
And probably a few others.
Yeah, like 6 or other.
Now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a commission and the rank of ensign. What department on the ship do you work in?
Ooh, I'm going to say bioengineering because today my day job, I work with a lot of universities.
Oh, okay.
And I had somebody come to me with a question about, well, if I was going to do this, how would it be? What would be the distinction between engineering and bioengineering? And I'm thinking, well, it's got bio
right, yeah.
in the name, and that just has been sort of stuck in my head all day. So there you go. That's my off the top of my head. I'm going to be in bioengineering. I have no idea what that means. It sounds great.
I think you have the department all to yourself, so you can just kind of make it up.
There you go. I'm the head of the department. So,
right.
What are the popular answers to that question?
They've been all over the board. I had somebody who wanted to work in turbolift control.
No.
Although I said, "How's the job going?" and of course, it has
its
ups
and downs.
Yeah. And engineering. Man, I'm trying to think now. They've kind of gone all over the map. But I don't think we've had one of those before.
All right. Very good. Very good.
Well, Ensign Lang, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
I hate when people ask me that because I'm a, what's the word I want to say?
A social media agnostic?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I have a Facebook account, and I have a lot of folks, who've made contact with me there, but I'm not a social media person. I have a Twitter account. I don't think I've looked at it in 3 years. I'm always happy to hear from, people through the Facebook, but the whole social media thing is a huge look, guys. Everybody, I'm talking to all of you right now. It's a huge time suck. You can write or you can be on social media. I know which one I choose. There you go. That's it.
But they can find your books, though, online, I'm sure.
Yes, Amazon, blah, 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 blah. I my books. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm just trying to help you out.
Thank you. No, I know I need to be better at this. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm an old guy, at least, relatively speaking. And I think social media is fine. It's part of the world, the fabric of the universe, but
kind of passes you by. I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were trying to get somebody's phone number, and neither of us had our phones, and we realized that we're probably the last generation, like the last people who had to remember phone numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Like kids today, they probably don't even, they know their own phone number, maybe. But I think that my generation sort of straddles that thing where you always knew, I knew 100 phone numbers, and now I don't know any.
Mm-hmm. No. I have a son. He's 22, and I asked him a couple days ago, "What's my phone number?" And he went, "It's in my phone." And I was like, "No, but what
right.
if you were at a payphone?" And he was like, "Wait, payphone?" I mean, he knew what I meant, but it was like that would never happen. In what universe is that something that would happen? No. So, yeah, you are absolutely correct.
Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a great pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. And we are signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.